Hi, welcome back to day 2 with this series of responses to Mike's question, all centered around the self and seeking energy in the maintenance of itself, and therefore how do we ever resolve this challenge? So today we're going to focus on the first part of what Mike shared, which I'll read again, and then I'll go into the response. So basically, the self wishes to maintain its existence, and a lot of its activity seems to be an effort to do this in one way or another. For example, apart from the obvious material or physical activities, the self is always in defense and constantly trying to maintain its position as a winner or controller. At the same time, it is insecure since it has no idea what it is, and so many of its actions have to be defended by its own illogical logic. Hard work maintaining a mirage. So let's get really clear about what we're talking about here when we're talking about the self, because that, it clears up so much confusion. And also through that, we'll see, as Mike's talking about here, this seeking energy and this attempt to maintain a mirage and this protection and defense, we'll see what's going on with that. So there is only one self. There is only one self. And that is who we all are. And most of your life, you will spend living as that without any consideration for anything else. Just life happening, living happening as you in this world. In the non-dual conversation, there are lots of different ways of talking about self, and sometimes they can create confusion. So the self that Mike's talking about here, where he's talking about the self that wishes to maintain its existence, the self that's a mirage, the self that is always in defense, constantly trying to maintain its position. This is the same one self that we always are, which temporarily forgets its nature and believes it's a separate self, believes it's a limited entity, alone in this big scary world, and hence what Mike's described around protecting, defending, trying to win, trying to control. Because if I believe I'm a separate, limited entity, then of course I'm going to protect myself against all these other limited entities. I'm going to learn strategies. I'm going to find techniques and approaches. I'm going to protect this one, and I'm going to defend myself from those ones. I'm going to maintain all the narratives that seem to make this one okay, and I'm going to push away everything else that makes it look like that might be at risk or in danger. So our whole experience when we're lost in that mirage or illusion of being a separate self, yes, our whole experience is one of hard work and effort, because it's trying to maintain something which is constantly in motion. Because when we're identified as a separate self, what we're actually identifying with are a bunch of thoughts. There is no entity, there is no thing which is the separate self. There's just a collection of thoughts and ideas which have been collected together over the years and made to look as though they're a solid picture, made it to look as though there's a solid, definite, separate self here called Helen. But it is like, it is like taking puzzle pieces. It's just that the puzzle pieces don't ever make a complete picture, because those puzzle pieces are made of thought, an idea, and collected patterns throughout our life, the nature of these thoughts is that they come and go and they change. So it's like having a jigsaw puzzle, but for which the pieces are constantly moving and changing and coming and going. So there's never actually a complete picture. But our system creates that impression. It creates the impression that there is a fixed, definite jigsaw here. When we look more closely, we find that there isn't. All that we can find are thoughts. I'm like this, I'm like that, I'm good at this, I'm not so good at that. I really need this, I don't want that. I want more of this one, I want less of that. I need someone like this, I don't want someone like that. I have to behave this way or else. I definitely can't behave that way or else. So it collects all these thoughts together as though to create this jigsaw. But if you pay any attention to the nature of thoughts, you'll see how transient they are. You'll see how much they move. And so this jigsaw is just then a constantly moving feast. And that actually was in today's piece. Yes, when he said at the same time it is insecure. Yes, this idea of being a separate self is insecure because of that constantly moving jigsaw puzzle picture, because the nature of it is made of thoughts, and those thoughts are always changing. So there's no security, there's no stability. So yes, when we are identified and believing we're a separate self, we feel insecure, which is super helpful because it alerts us to the fact that that's what's going on. So the self wishes to maintain its existence, and a lot of its activity seems to be an effort to do this. So in a way, yes. So remember, there's one self, and it's temporarily identifying with these jigsaw puzzle piece thoughts. While identified with those jigsaw puzzle piece thoughts, yes, we think that's who we are, and therefore we think that has to be maintained, because we think, who would I be in the absence of these thoughts and ideas? Who would I be if I wasn't this collection of stuff? Who would I be if I wasn't this separate self that I think I am? Even though believing I'm a separate self is the feeling of suffering, is the feeling of anxiety and insecurity and lack of safety, lack of okayness, even though that identifying as a separate self feels bad, there is equally a fear that, well, who would I be in the absence of this? And so, yes, when identified as a separate self, there's the idea that I must maintain this, even though it's uncomfortable, even though I'm suffering in this experience, I must maintain it, because who would I be if I didn't? Who would I be if all this fell away? And so that's why a core part of the exploration has two aspects to it. One is to shine this light on this ever-moving jigsaw puzzle feast, to recognize that for what it is, to recognize the nature of that, to recognize that, in fact, this separate self, when we go looking for it, cannot be found apart from in a thought. And the other aspect is that when we look for who I really am, there is one self discovered, not a self of form, not a self of objective nature, but that which I am, which you are, which we all are, and which everybody agrees upon in terms of its nature. I've never yet found anybody who doesn't have the same experience. And so through that exploration of those two aspects, that's what begins to shift our identification away from this ever-moving jigsaw puzzle feast of belief in separation, and has us ground more deeply in the identification of the self that we always are and always have been, and that which is before any thought about who I think I am. And so when we're thinking about this self that wishes to maintain its existence, kind of yes and no. When we're caught in it, when we're caught in the belief in separation, yeah, it looks like it's necessary to maintain that. But the more we're in the exploration of the nature of the belief in separation and the nature of who I really am, both of those things drop the habit of believing I'm a separate self. And so actually then the desire to maintain this belief in separate self falls away, because it's seen that the belief of this is suffering. The belief that this is who I am is suffering. The recognition that this is who I am is the contentment and peace and love and joy and fulfillment and security that we've always been looking for. So yeah, so both of those create cracks in the storyline, which stops this experience of maintaining the existence of a separate self, because it starts to look futile. It starts to be recognized as pointless. It starts to be recognized as suffering. And when we've seen that there's something much nicer, more grounded, more enjoyable that we really are, this just falls away as something to identify with. So I'll leave it here for today. Excuse me. And I shall see you again tomorrow. Much love.